Welcome back. It's time. It's time for the finale. It's time for the finale. It's time for the finale. Hopefully, the tech issues I had are not affecting this VOD. If they do, I apologize, but that's as many times as I'm willing to try this. um, the last couple of voice tests I did came out clean, so I'm thinking we should be okay. If we're not, fucking, I'll swap mics and we'll figure it out a little less, a little bit lower quality. Hi Moon. Let me know at any point if this glitches out again. I think I solved it. The cable was loose and the software needed an update. So fingers crossed that's all it was. But onto the book. I got blue balled there for a bit. We're going in on chapter 10 from the beginning. Lieutenant. My ears were ringing so loudly that I could not hear the words, only see Miss Potter's lips moving. I was on my knees. The damp chill of the crypt was sinking into my bones. My shoulder throbbed. Madeline was gone. Her body was gone. Someone must have moved it. Yes, of course. Usher, perhaps, to conceal his crime. She had been dead for 3 days, so it was a bit late for that, but it was the only explanation. It was foolishness to think that she might have moved on her own, sat up on the slab, pushed the shroud aside like a blanket. The dead don't walk. Lieutenant. I heard that word faintly. It had the force of command to it, and I straightened involuntarily. Yes, I said, probably too loudly. I apologize. There should be a body here. It was a shock. Miss Potter helped me to my feet. Lieutenant, I fear that after the loss of your friend, your nerves may be somewhat overset. This was a polite English way of saying that she thought I was a squalling lunatic, and I couldn't argue that point. At least the shroud was still there. I picked it up and spread it across the slab, looking for the white hairs that I had seen. The relief when I found one was intense. At least this much was real. I pointed to a patch and said, Are these hyphae? She gave me a narrow-eyed look, perhaps for dragging her mycology into my madness. But she took out her magnifying glass and set the lantern to the slab to look. I waited with my heart in my throat. Looking toward the open door, a tiny voice whispered that it would swing shut and we would hear the bar fall into place and we would be trapped down here. I took a few cautious steps toward the door, wondering if I could rush to it in time if I heard the hinges creak. Said Miss Potter. What is it? She made an impatient gesture. Give me time. Sorry. I went back to my maudlin imaginings. Would it be Roderick Usher, determined to hide his crime? Or something worse? Would it be a figure in white, animated by some terrible force? The force that had moved a hair, missing half its head to stand up and stare? The dead don't walk. The dead don't walk. If they did, then... I don't know what. Something dreadful. I'd killed so many people and seen so many die, and what if none of them were peaceful in the ground? What if they were roaming around? What if I would have to face them and explain? Definitely hyphae, said Miss Potter, setting down her magnifying glass. I would require a stronger glass to state for certain whether this was septate or non-septate, and I cannot swear that these are not pseudo-hyphae found in yeasts. Nevertheless, they are not human hairs nor fabric threads. What if I told you those were growing out of a human skin? Miss Potter made a well-bred motion of her chin that, in another person, would have been a vast shrug. Saprophytic fungi, that is to say, those that feed upon decaying organic matter, are exceedingly common. Unsightly, perhaps, but they pose no threat to living creatures. Madeline was alive at the time, I said, holding her gaze, and there were so many of them on her skin that I thought her hair and body had turned white. The English, in my experience, make an enormous deal about the most minor inconveniences, but if you confront them with something world-shattering, they do not blink. Miss Potter did blink, but only once. And then she looked down at her magnifying glass and said, I see. Could that be what sickened her? I asked. If the fungus was so widespread that it was sending filaments through her skin, yes, certainly. The stiffness of her upper lip was magnificent to behold. But what has become of her body? The dead don't walk. Most likely Roderick moved the body to further conceal his crime. And Denton must know that something is wrong with Roderick and helped him cover it up, but he doesn't know the cause. If he knows what it is, perhaps he can treat it. I don't know, but I must tell Denton. Indeed, she said, you must tell everyone. If this is a fungus that can spread on a living host, it must be stopped immediately. She reached into her bag and took out a small silver flask, which she jumped over her hands. I could smell the sting of alcohol from where I stood. Give me your hands, Lieutenant. You touched the shroud. I touched Madeline, I said grimly. Several times. The hyphae tore away at my hands. Her eyes lifted to mine. Then we shall hope this is effective after the fact. I listened to the dripping of spirits on the crypt floor as she sloshed whiskey over my fingers, then rubbed my hands together. Were the hairs also affected? How could I tell? What were a few more white threads on a hare's pelt? The fish, like slimy felt, Angus had said. Did the fungus originate in the tarn after all? Had it jumped from fish to hare, or perhaps when no hares came down to drink? Had Angus touched it himself? And where the hell was Madeline's body? Then, I cried, bursting into the study. Madeline's gone. He stared at me for a long moment, then his face softened and he reached out and touched my arm. I know, he said, gently. I know, but she's not suffering any longer, and... No, you blithering idiot, I growled, shaking his hand off. Damnable English language, more words than anybody can be expected to keep track of, and then they use the same one for about 3 different things. I know she's dead. I'm telling you, her body's gone. Denton blinked at me. What? She's not in the crypt. Slab is empty. We cannot habeas the corpus. Is any of this getting through? I was perhaps less reverent than the situation warranted, but it's a flaw of mine that I become sarcastic when I'm frustrated. Are you serious? Miss Potter coughed politely behind me. I can assure you, young man, that the lieutenant is quite correct. Miss Potter, what are... Denton obviously started to question her presence, but then just as obviously abandoned it for more important things. No, later. This is dreadful. Do you think Roderick moved her? I asked. I was expecting him to look away from guilt, but he met my eyes squarely. Perhaps. You know there's something wrong with him, I said softly. You know what he did. Denton cut my words off with a slicing motion of his hand. It's not the time. Well, then let us find Roderick and... He's asleep, said Denton. Then we'll wake him and... I gave him a sleeping pill, said Denton. He won't wake up for hours. No, don't glare so, Lieutenant. He says he can't sleep at all, that he hears his sister walking in the crypt. I don't think he's got an hour of straight sleep since she died. That's what I was trying to tell you. This bizarre malady of his, it's the same thing Madeline had. Denton blinked at me. What? It's not a disease, it's a fungus. Oh, for pity's sake, Miss Potter, you tell him. Miss Potter drew Denton aside and explained in what I assume was English, but saprophytic fungi and the hyphae. I stared at the wall and wondered if Roderick had moved Maddie's body out of guilt or some notion that he would stop hearing her walk if she was no longer in the crypt. Christ's blood. Now that we knew what it was, could we treat it somehow? Possibly, Denton was saying. It's possible. I would not have thought it, but no doctor worth his salt would ever say that he's seen everything there is to see. But I don't know how we can prove it. The shroud may have been moldy after all. An autopsy on Maddie's body would show it, I said shortly. A body that we don't have. And I'm certainly not going to slice open Roderick's skin looking for these hyphae. I gritted my teeth. Then it'll have to be the hair. And this time I won't miss. It was Angus who provided the hair. I swallowed my pride and gone to him to ask for help. Not for eating, I won't, he said. But when I explained that it was going to be dissected, he put his head to one side and said, How fresh do you be needing it? There's one not 100 feet from from the end of the causeway. It fell in the lake by the look of it. Saw it on the way back from the village this morning. We tromped out to find it. Sure enough, there one was, lying half in, half out of the water, face down. It looked as if it had simply wandered up to the tarn and fallen asleep. I was wearing my riding gloves, but I went back for a long stick from the woodpile and fished it out without touching the water. Angus raised his eyebrows at me, but didn't comment. There were 4 of us assembled around the breakfast table this time, although what was laid out was substantially less appetizing. The light was the best in the house, and that was all we could hope for. We had brought in lamps and candles from our rooms and crowded them along the table until the table was drowning in light. Denton had fetched his doctor's bag and opened it, a black leather mouth gleaming with scalpel teeth. "Miss Potter," said Angus, touching his cap, "'tis a pleasure to see you." Miss Potter actually went a little pink. "Mr. Angus, I didn't think I'd see you so soon." "You two met, then?" Come to think of it, Angus hadn't been complaining about the lack of occupation lately, but I'd been too distracted to pay attention. "Oh, yes. Mr. Angus was kind enough to hold my umbrella at just the right angle the other day while I painted a particularly fine Amanita Phallides." God. I was trying to come up with a joke about the Phallides that would not end in Miss Potter hitting me with her umbrella when Denton cleared his throat and called us back to reality. "I am making the first incision," he said. "Wait." Miss Potter looked around the room, found a stack of linen napkins, and hastily handed them around. "Cover your mouth and nose. If there are spores, and this is indeed a dangerous fungus, we do not wish to inhale them." I knotted the napkin around my head. Denton muttered something about feeling like he was about to rob a stagecoach, and then took up the scalpel again. We watched in silence as the blade parted fur and skin, then cut deeper. It was hard to tell what might be hyphae. The ligaments that connected skin to flesh are also pale and very fine. But once he opened up the chest with shears, it became clear that something had been very wrong with his hair. "Slimy felt," said Angus. "Like the blood. Begging your pardon, ma'am. Like the blasted fish." Denton touched the matted surface gingerly with the tip of the scalpel. It did indeed look as if something was adhering to the surface of the organs, something slimy and fibrous, though it was a dark reddish color instead of the brilliant white of the hyphae on Madeline's arms. The red stuff looked almost like seaweed you see dried along the rocks on the coast, forming a sticky membrane over everything. "The animal is female," said Denton dispassionately. "And if it were human, would it be diagnosed with hysterical catalepsy?" I thought. Miss Potter took out her magnifying glass and bent over the animal. If being 6 inches from the animal's viscera troubled her, she gave no sign. "Fungal," she confirmed. "Would that be enough to kill it?" I asked. "There's no way of telling," she said, folding the magnifying glass back into its case. "We know nothing about this fungus, about its malignancy, about how long it would take to grow to this extent. Some molds can spread incredibly quickly, and this hair has presumably been dead for some time." "Looked like it drowned," volunteered Angus. "If it drowned, presumably its lungs are full of water," Denton said, drawing the scalpel almost absently across the left lung. The tissue retracted and the contents bulged out in a sticky white mass. It looked like cotton wool erupting from the chest cavity as if it had been packed in too tightly to contain. Denton jerked back with a curse. "I will go out on a limb, I said, "and say that's not normal for drowning." "Good God," said Denton. He opened up the other lung, and the white woolen mat of fungus bulged out there, too. He grabbed a fork off the table and began digging around. I felt my gorge rise. I field dressed any number of animals, and I don't mind guts, but this was something else again. Denton shook his head slowly, setting down the fork. "The lungs are packed with it. That's not possible. Lungs aren't hollow, they're like a honeycomb. But this stuff got in, and it's like it just ate the interior away somehow." "A warm, moist growth medium," said Miss Potter. "It's very conductive to the growth of many, many fungi." "Yes, but it can't possibly have lived through..." The animal moved. There were 3 veterans at that table. Battle-scarred soldiers who had served their countries honorably in more than one war. And all 3 of us screamed like little children and recoiled in horror. The hare kicked twice, not seeming to care that its guts were open to the air, and managed to roll itself over. Angus flung himself in front of Miss Potter. I flung myself backwards in my chair, knocking it over and taking it with me. This proved to be providential because Din flung his scalpel aside and would have speared me handily with it if I hadn't been on my back on the floor. By the time I was upright, the hair was crawling along the table, leaving a broad pink smear across the tablecloth. Din was in the corner, quivering, and Angus looked dazed. Miss Potter flipped her umbrella around and pinned the hair in place with the tip. "Gentlemen," she said, "I will hold it in place if one of you would like to kill it again." Moving almost mechanically, I reached into Din's bag and pulled out a heavy blade that looked akin to a meat cleaver. The hair twitched and paddled its feet against the tablecloth. Thin taste of bile coated my tongue. One solid chop with the cleaver severed the hare's spine, and it fell limp. I did not stop until the body had fully detached from the head, and even then I might have kept going, but Angus took the cleaver away from me. "It's done," he said. "It isn't," said Miss Potter. "The head is still moving." I looked at the head pinned under the umbrella and saw the mouth opening and closing, the chisel teeth catching on the tablecloth, and then my gorge rose and I turned and ran to the privy. Oh, I gotta take a second. Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck, that's nasty. Jesus. Christmas Eve. Kill it with fire. Yeah, dude, fuck. That's gnarly. When I was empty of even the memory of food, I dragged myself back to the drawing room. They had thrown the tablecloth over the twitching hair and wrapped it in a featureless ball. Din was as white as the linen napkin over his face as he stood repacking his bag. "The fungus grew in the greatest concentration at the top of the spinal column," he said, in a distant, precise voice. It had completely wrapped around the vertebrae there and intruded into the skull. "But severing the spine killed the body," I said. The image of Madeline's corpse, her head bent, intruded my mind. "No." He slammed the bag shut. "The hair has been dead for days. Whatever that thing is, it was moving around like a puppet. All we did was cut the main strings." "Nor will they stay cut," said Miss Potter. She sounded the calmest of the four of us. "The growth rate of some fungi, as I said, is extraordinary. I suspect that if we left this specimen alone long enough, it would regrow the connections and begin to move again. Price, blood." I put my head in my hands. "The dead don't walk, except sometimes when they do." "Then Madeline." "Don't." Din nearly shouted the word. After a moment, he said, "Let's get rid of this thing. I can't think about the other thing. Not yet." "Throw it in the lake, then?" I said. "I do not recommend that, Lieutenant. If it comes in contact with the water supply, it could infect anyone who drinks the water." Angus's mustache sagged. So did the rest of him. "Miss Potter," he said quietly. "It's in the lake already. It's in the fish. All our drinking water comes from the lake. All of us, 3 of us, have been drinking it and bathing in it for days. Weeks for me," said Din. Miss Potter, to her credit, did not recoil in horror from us. She nodded once slowly and said, "Then I am afraid, gentlemen, that there is a chance that all of you have contracted it already." Din nodded to himself. I looked down at my arms, picturing the skin under the fabric with its fine dark hairs. If I shoved the sleeves back, would there be long white strands emerging from the surface? "We'll burn it," I said, grabbing the bundle of cloth. I fancied I could feel a quiver of motion inside. Angus spring lamp oil. The stable yard was empty. The horses tucked away in their stalls. God, was the foul stuff inside Hob too? Had I killed him by bringing him here? We passed through it to the ragged garden, the burn pile. It was pitifully small. Every scrap that could be used to heat the house had already been scavenged. I dropped the tablecloth and its contents onto the darkened paving stones, and Angus emptied one of the lamps over the cloth, then knelt and lit it. We stood shoulder to shoulder around it in a semicircle, close enough to feel the heat of the flame, unwilling to leave until the beast had been reduced to ash. Occasionally, Angus would stir it with a stick, and we used Roderick's lamp oil recklessly to finish the job. It was thus some time before we had finished, and the evening was drawing in. When we all turned back to the house, Miss Potter's startled cry froze us all. "What is that light?" Thickly greenish radiance haloed from near the near end of the house. It was faint enough that perhaps we would not have seen it if the sky had been brighter, but against the darkness it stood out in sharp relief. A fire, said Din, although it's not as if he believed it. A chemical fire. We had only to go a little way to the edge of the tarn came into view, and that answered the question while raising many new ones. The lake was glowing. It was the same thing I'd seen days before, the pulsing lights that seemed to chase one another along the edges of unseen shapes, but far brighter than last time. The glow picked up the faint mist that settled across the lake and turned into a cloud of sickly light. The waters themselves seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, but far more rapidly than any human heart. I wondered how it compared to a hare's heartbeat, and then I looked around. Not too far away, its eyes lit with reflected green fire, a hare stood and watched us. Angus, I see it. The four of us went very slowly around the edge of the tarn. The lights grew brighter, the hare did not follow, and it was too dark to make out any others. My skin crawled with awareness. At last we stood before the causeway that led into the house. Well, said Miss Eugenia Potter, gazing into the flickering water, I can tell you that has not been recorded in the annals of mycology. How do we destroy a fungus? I asked Miss Potter. Quick, how does something like this die? She tore her eyes away from the lake and stared at me blankly. Antifungals? She said finally. There are woods with antifungal properties, some powders. Hydrogen peroxide, perhaps? You don't know? I draw mushrooms, Lieutenant. I'm usually trying to keep them alive. I put my head in my hands. We used to treat foot fungus with alcohol in the army, said Denton. Have them soak their feet in it. Certainly that could work, but how much alcohol do you have available? Asked Miss Potter. Can you drown the full tarn? I've got a bottle of livered, I said. And presumably there's still a wine cellar, although it may be somewhat picked over. Miss Potter's expression indicated that the wine cellar was not going to work. Never mind, I said, watching the pulsing lights. Never mind, never mind. We'll deal with it. I'll deal with it. Angus. I turned. Angus, I want you to get Miss Potter away from here. Take Hob. You can get us a wagon, leave him at the stable, and if any of us live, Christ's blood, both our horses might be infected. I'll sort it, said Angus. I had no doubts. He'd made his entire career sorting logistics for far more complicated than a couple of horses. Lieutenant, Miss Potter began, drawing herself up to her full height, which was taller than mine, and glared down at me. I assure you I am not I am not some shrinking violet who requires an escort to safety lest I faint. Miss Potter, I said, I would never dream of suggesting it. But you are the only person who has the faintest idea, scientifically, what we may be dealing with here, and who has any hope of explaining it to the authorities in a way that does not sound completely mad. And if there's an infection or infestation or whatever you'd call this, the authorities must be warned. Angus must go with you to make certain that you are taken seriously because, well, I leaned in and said in an undertone, you know what men are like when women try to tell them anything. Miss Potter's expression thawed. She sighed heavily and picked up her umbrella. You are not wrong there, Lieutenant. Very well. She gave the glowing tarn one last grim look. They vanished into the stable and emerged moments later. Miss Potter rode Hob, who seemed somewhat astonished, but who was on his very best manners. That's an English gentlewoman you're carrying, I admonished him. Probably 15th in line to the throne. You be polite. More like 115th, said Miss Potter. A fact which gives me great comfort. She patted Hobbs' neck. Please take extremely good notes on what happens with the lake, Lieutenant. I do so hate to miss this. I shall make observations that will cause the Royal Mycology Society to tremble in their boots. I promised. Angus, watch for hares. Aye. And watch your skin, youngster. I'm too old to break in another officer. They hurried away down the road as fast as they could safely move in the dark. I watched them go, then turned to Din. Now what? He said, staring at the lake. The light show was beginning to wane, though flickers of light still went racing through the dark water in intervals. All right, I said grimly. They're gone. Now we talk. What a lot of things to drop on me in one chapter. Oh man. This is what I needed. This is what I've been needing. I've been needing this. Now, chapter 11 is fairly short, so we'll proceed quickly through this. Chapter 11. I know her neck's been broken, I said. Roderick, I assume? Din inhaled sharply. How did you know? He asked. I went down to the crypt and looked. Ah, he grimaced. It wasn't murder, if that's what you mean. Well, it was, but it's not. That is... He rubbed his face. I need a drink. I'll pour, and tell me everything. I would have burned my last bottle of liver in such a case. Such a just cause, but fortunately Din had his own brandy. His rooms did not look much different from mine, although he had no man to help him. Roderick called me in a month ago, he said, collapsing into a chair. It sent up a puff of dust and probably mold spores, but really what was one more said at this point? For the catalepsy. Not exactly. He took a swig of brandy. It was madness that concerned him. What madness was that? Din groaned, got up and fished through his belongings until he came up with a battered envelope. Here. No sense in playing 20 questions when you can just read it. I recognized Roderick's spidery handwriting as I unfolded the letter. He wasted no time on salutations. Din, I need your help. There's something desperately wrong with Madeline, more than just the catalepsy that has afflicted her for some years. Since her near drowning, she has fallen under some spell of strange madness, one that leaves her speaking in ways entirely unlike herself. She will be entirely herself one morning, and then by afternoon I'll find her speaking to the servant as if she is a small child. She points at things and asks for their names and seems astonished. Her voice is very strange. When I confront her, she'll revert immediately back to her old self, but she acts very strange and sly, saying it was merely a moment of muddle-headedness. What she is doing is frightening the servants. Worst of all, I've heard someone speak this way before, but it was Alice, her maid, who spoke in such a fashion. I would overhear them sometimes in Madeline's room. At the time, I thought Alice was doing impressions to make her laugh. You'll think me quite deluded, then, but when I hear this voice she speaks in, I begin to think of stories of demonic possession, not of illness. It is very terrible to witness. I know that you are a man of reason, and I strive to be, though this dreadful estate has acted badly on my nerves. Please, I beg of you, if there is any kindness in your heart left for either of us, come and help me. The signature was Roderick's. I read the letter twice, remembering the strange way that Madeline had spoken that night I found her sleepwalking. The way that she had counted. Not Maddie, she'd said. If she wasn't Maddie, who was she? You don't believe in possession, of course, I said, looking up. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio. But no, I don't believe that particular one. He paused, then said very quietly, didn't believe that particular one. And now? Din shook his head. I don't know what I believe anymore. When I spoke to Madeline, she was exactly as she'd always been. Till she wasn't. Explain. I can't. Not rationally. She seemed to undergo some kind of mental shift and then her speech changed. Not like anything I've seen before. He stared at the ceiling. Slurred speech with aphasia, which is about as useful a diagnosis as catalepsy. Most of us get that when we're drunk, for God's sake. I'm a cut-rate surgeon, Easton. I chop off limbs. I'm not an alienist. He scowled. I told you that she almost drowned, yes? I nodded and he continued. Roderick thought, and I begin to agree, that there was nothing almost about it. He told me that she had been in the water for hours when he found her. I stared at him, willing the words to make sense, and couldn't. What? I thought he'd lost it, said Din bluntly. Time slows when you panic, of course. He pulled her out and thought it was much too late, so he took her down to the crypt and sobbed over her for half the night. I swallowed. And she woke up and began speaking to him in that voice he found so upsetting. How's that possible? Could she really have drowned? I don't know why I was asking when I had seen the hair twitching, but hares are not the same as humans, are they? Din shook his head. Drowning is strange, he admitted. People come back sometimes, long after you'd think they were gone, particularly when they've been in cold water. That's what I told Roderick anyway, when he insisted that she had been in the water for more than a few minutes. He sank back into the chair, and I went on believing that Madeline was just groggy from waking up after a fright, and Roderick had panicked and believed she was in the water for far longer than she was. And it was after this that she began to manifest this otherness. Denton nodded again. I thought the drowning had little to do with it. It seemed more likely that this was a result of the suicide of her maid. They were close. Perhaps she was trying to keep a game they had played alive somehow. And now? He snorted. Now it's obvious, isn't it? It's this fungus. It's causing this altered state somehow. First in the maid, then in Madeline. Perhaps it's a hallucinogenic effect of some sort. Perhaps simple poisoning. Why kill her? It was a measure of how far I had come that I could ask the question without any particular condemnation. Roderick says he didn't mean to kill her, but the thing that had taken over her body. So the fungus got into her from the lake, and now it's affected her and made her act this way. So it would seem. Denton's face was bleak. After a moment, he said tonelessly, after he killed her, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on, but Roderick said it was evil and it was devouring Maddie, and God have mercy on me, I can't say he was wrong. I thought of Maddie's smile that night, the flat-eyed rictus and the way that I had recoiled from it. Evil might not be the right word, but I could see how Roderick had come to it. So you covered for him. Yes. I know it was wrong, but he lifted his hands and let them drop. He's dying too. I can't imagine him lasting much longer in this state. All right, I said. All right. I tried to formulate the words that had to be spoken and then drain my brandy instead. I would have liked to get extremely drunk. I would have liked to get on a horse and ride away as fast as its hooves would carry me, but Hob was gone and Angus with him. Both Denton and I knew the truth, but saying the words would make it real, and dear God, how I wanted it not to be real. I set the tumbler down and took a deep breath. Madeline's like the hair now, I continued grimly. That's why she's not on the slab. This thing is moving her around. I don't know how long we sat there after that, drinking our courage. Too long, probably. But sooner or later you have to act or resign yourself to not acting at all. We have to find her body, I said, rising from my chair. She must still be in the crypt, said Denton. Surely it can't move her very far. I stared at him, then realized that he had not seen the hares in their terrible ratcheting crawl, only the one at the table who managed a few feet before being stopped. I think perhaps it can do a bit more than that, I'd said. Denton picked up the bottle and drained it dry. We can't let Roderick see her like this, he said. We'll have to burn the body. I nodded and picked up a lamp. So did Denton. I still had my pistol, but what good would shooting Maddie's corpse do? It hadn't stopped the hair. The crypt steps were cold and dark, and both Denton and I were jumpy. Every movement of the lamps made the shadows flicker, and whenever one loomed too large, we both recoiled. You'd think we were a pair of children, not soldiers, I muttered. Denton mumbled something under his breath that I didn't quite catch. A dozen steps from the bottom, I stopped. Denton nearly ran into my back. I lifted the lamp high, revealing the crypt door. The unbarred crypt door. The door that was now ajar. Why did you stop? Whispered Denton. The door's open. Did you close it before? I thought I had. I hadn't barred it, though. Why bar a door to an empty crypt? Could Roderick have gone in? Roderick shouldn't even be able to get up and piss in the pot, said Denton. He paused and then added grudgingly, Of course, I had been nothing but wrong since the beginning, so my medical opinion isn't worth a plug nickel. I wondered what the hell a plug nickel was, but it didn't seem like the time to ask. I went to the last few steps and pushed the door aside. The slab was still empty. Maddie, I called. The echoes rushed through the room like birds, and I could hear my voice ringing faintly down the corridor on the far side of the crypt into the catacombs where generations of ushers lay moldering. No answer. I listened for any sound at all, a rustle of winding clothes, the sound of a body dragging itself, one limb at a time. Nothing. She isn't here, I said. She's got to be, said Denton. You can't tell me she managed all those stairs. Why not? A suspicion had been forming in the back of my brain for hours now, and I'd been fighting it down. If I didn't put it into words, I could pretend I wasn't thinking it at all. Because she's dead. And it's a fungus, not a... He groped for words. The glorified mushroom. Maybe he can make a body flail around, but that's all. She must have just rolled off the slab. I lifted the lamp, splashing light in the corners of the room. Look around, Denton. Do you see her? He strode forward, rounding the slab, clearly expecting to find the body there. I would have been offended that he thought Miss Potter and I could have missed the entire corpse, but I had a feeling he had thoughts of his own that he was trying to avoid. Not finding a body, he went all the way around the slab again. Then he took a few steps toward the corridor, deeper into the catacombs. Then he stopped, clearly thinking better of it. Are you certain you closed the door? He asked. Yes. The bar I might have forgotten, but we would have closed the door. I raised my hand. I know doors are complicated for a fungus to figure out, but here we are. It must have been Roderick, or one of the servants. Your man Angus, if you told him. It was not Angus. A servant, then. I just looked at him. He growled and stalked back to the corridor, lamp in hand. I went after him, not wanting him to vanish into the depths of the catacomb alone. What if Madeline is in there, waiting? I looked down and stopped short with a hiss. What? Denton turned, the flame reflecting an orange pinprick in his eyes. Look at the floor. Look at the dust. It had been years since the dust of the corridor was disturbed, perhaps decades. I could not remember how long it had been since Roderick's father died. It lay in a thick carpet across the floor. 2 lines of footprints stood out in stark relief. Someone with small feet had shuffled through here not long ago. Their feet had dragged along the floor, leaving smeared lines, but every few feet, the imprint of bare toes was unmistakable. Then they had come the other way. Oh, fuck. Denton swallowed convulsively. Someone came this way. Someone, yes, and then came back. I took a step back toward the main crypt. Gratitude flashed across his face, and then the two of us rushed back the way we had come. We did not run. If we ran, then we would have to admit there was something to run from. If we ran, then the small child that lives in every soldier's heart knew the monsters could get us. So we did not run, but it was a near thing. The door was still open. The floor here was too overwritten with too many footprints to hold any clues as to who had gone where. I went to the crypt door, trying to think. Heavy wood with ornate iron scroll work, as gothic as the rest of the damned manor. Madeline had been a little shorter than I was. She had reached out to the door. Didn't. What? I pointed silently. Next to the iron rung, just where someone's arm would fall if they leaned their weight against the door, was a metal cross. Caught along the edge were a dozen fine white hairs. Woo-hoo-hoo. I expected Denton to argue. Tell me that it must have been the shroud brushing against the door. But he stared at the white hairs for a long, long moment, and then he breathed out all at once and squared his shoulders. I see. She walked into the catacombs by herself, and walked out again later, and had done so on 2 feet, and operated the door. He nodded once, not taking his eyes off the door. Denton, I said, I think we must face the possibility that Madeline is... I struggled for a word and finally settled on... conscious. It's impossible, he said almost casually. But that hasn't stopped anything so far, has it? Why is it impossible? Because she's dead. And mushrooms aren't conscious. Suppose she isn't dead. No, listen to me. You said people drown sometimes and they come back long after they should have been dead, yes? Hours after, Lieutenant, not days. Suppose the fungus kept her alive. It lives in water, yes? So it can survive drowning. What if it did something so that its host survived too? Denton finally did look at me, opening his mouth, then closing it again. I could practically see him thinking it through. Brains die from lack of oxygen, he said slowly. This fungus could somehow provide oxygen, absorb it and pass it to the brain. Yes, all right. It's a damn fool notion, and I should believe it for a second, but if it's already in the brainstem, why not? Madeline wakes up a few days after her neck is broken, I said. She gets up and walks into the catacombs. Miss Potter and I come down and then leave. She comes back to the crypt and finds the door unbarred. She opens it and goes out. I gestured up to the steps. Which means she's somewhere in the house. Finn sounded amused, but I recognized it as the humor that men get when they see the line of cannons pulled into position. Ah, yes, of course, the enemy has cannons. Why wouldn't they? Oh, and we're out of bullets, you say? Ah! Yes. Where would she go? What do you think? I started up the stairs. Where would you go if somebody broke your neck? Go after Roger. I'm sorry, that I got a Discord notification that startled the hell out of me. Oh shit. This time we did run. We pounded up the stairs, Denton led the way to Roderick's chambers. Our bouncing lamps filled the walls with shadowy giants. If we weren't careful, we'd spill the oil and burn the whole damn place down. The upper hall was already lit, not by candles, but by a pale, sickly light through the window at the end of the hall. Christ, it was already dawn. How long had we sat drinking and trying to get our minds around this? How long had we spent in the crypt? How long had Madeline been alone with her helpless brother? Roderick's door opened outward into the hall and stood ajar now. Den and I shared one frantic glance, and then both of us tried to jam ourselves through the doorway simultaneously. I was marginally faster, and so I was the one who burst into Roderick's room, pistol in one hand and lamp in the other, to find Madeline, sitting on Roderick's bed. Woo, boy. Fuck. My nerves. My nerves. Quick water break. Oh, God. I'm so creeped out. All right. Almost done. 2 more chapters to go. Chapter 12. Her head was bent over at a terrible angle, neck horribly askew. She had to turn her whole body to face the door while her head flopped sideways. She hitched up one shoulder to keep it partly upright, and something about that small gesture was so dreadful that it stopped me in my tracks. "Alex," she said. Her voice was shallow and breathy, as if she could not draw in much air. Were her lungs felted with fungus like the hair? Was it simply that her neck was broken? Did it even matter? Madeline. Roger was still lying on the bed, on his side. I could not tell if he was breathing. Had she killed him? If she has, was it murder or simply justice? Shooting me won't do much, she whispered. Her hair was loose and fell over her eyes, white hair on bone-colored skin. When she lifted her hand to push it away, her fingers were violet black, and a long line ran down the underside of her arms. You see that in dead men sometimes, when the blood is pooled. Whatever the fungus was doing to her, Madeline's heart had stopped beating days ago. She coughed, and her voice gained a little strength. I suppose I wouldn't enjoy it, though. She smiled ruefully at me, and it was her familiar smile, the one I'd known since we were children. Oh, God, Maddie, I said. I lowered the gun. Did I really think I could shoot her? Oh, God, what's happened to you? The broken neck was a problem, she said musingly. The tarn had just been in my brain and my skin. Now Va had to grow all the way down, past the break. Took days. She shook her head at me, flopping it from side to side. I could see the sharp angle of her windpipe. Nausea clawed at me. Clever. Of Roderick. He never understood the tarn. Din had come up beside me, his eyes on the bed. Is Roderick alive, Madeline? I didn't kill him. She coughed again and her head slipped off her shoulder, bouncing in time. I had to look away. When I looked back, she had reached up to her mouth and was tugging. Long white strands came out and she wrapped them around her hand and let them fall carelessly in her lap. There, said, her voice stronger. That's a little better. Ba filled my lungs, you see. to save me, but now there's too much. She pushed her head back up onto her shoulder. Va? Who was she referring to like a child? The Tarn. He smiled up at me. It's always been the Tarn. Denton took a step forward. May I examine Roderick? He asked. It was the right thing to do, of course, but I was desperate to find out what Madeline meant and why she was referring to the lake as one would a child. Yes. Denton circled the bed as cautiously as if it contained an unexploded shell. Madeline ignored him. I wondered how fast she could move. I caught myself rubbing the trigger guard with my finger and stopped. Terrible habit. Angus would have yelled at me. Maddie, I said, hoping to hold her attention. What do you mean it's always been the Tarn? Va's been reaching out for so long, she said wistfully. Va could get into animals. Va learned Va's senses that way. I can't imagine what that must have been like the first time. Think of it. You had no sight and not even the sense that sight existed. How would you get there? Hearing was easier. Va understood vibrations, and that's all hearing is. And Va already knew smell. She pointed to her eyes. But how would you ever think these two round sacks of jelly did anything? But the Tarn figured it out. I swallowed. Behind Madeline, Denton gave me a thumbs up. Roderick was still alive. Thank Christ. You're telling me that the Tarn is intelligent, I said. She smiled up at me. More than you or I are. Think of all Va's managed to learn. And Denton was tugging on Roderick's wrist, possibly trying to get him out of bed. The Tarn talks to you? Communicates with you somehow? Half of me thought that she'd gone mad. The other half pointed out that I was already having a conversation with a dead woman. Mushrooms don't think. Yes, and the dead don't move either. Speech was the hardest, said Madeline. She plucked another puff of hyphae from her lips. I had to teach Van a kind of sign language at first. Va didn't understand speech at all. She giggled again, a papery, rasping giggle that set my teeth on edge, made even worse by the impossible angle of her windpipe. When you think about it, we talk by coughing up air and wriggling our lips through it. How could anyone ever understand that if you weren't born to it? But Va grasped it eventually. Breath moving hard, I thought. Not Maddie. Maddie won and me won. Oh God, it was the Tarn talking. She taught the fungus to talk. There had been clues in front of me, but how could I have possibly guessed the truth? How could I have known that when Maddie was naming the wall and the candle and counting, it was actually a vocabulary lesson? How could I possibly have known that she would treat the fungus like a child? Denton had gotten Roderick out of bed. The last male usher looked groggy and leaned against Denton like a drunk, but he was moving. I heard him mumble a question and Denton shushed him. Madeline started to turn, and I stepped forward hastily to distract her. You taught Van, the Tarn, how to talk? It worked. He beamed at me. Once Va realized we were using sound to communicate, Va almost taught Van self. So smart. My maid and Va'd take over Alice, and then I'd teach Van what I could. But then Alice killed herself, that silly creature, and it got harder. A flash of something crossed over her face. Sorrow or anger or disappointment, I couldn't tell. She killed herself. She didn't understand. Madeline started to stand. One hand snaked out to grab the bedpost, almost as if it were disconnected from the rest of her. She didn't understand what Va was trying to do. Then her fool brother took her body away and burned it. Can you imagine? She couldn't even come back. Fire stops it then, I thought. And a wave of unutterable relief passed over me. If it got into me, as long as Angus burned my body, it would be all right. The dead may walk, but I will not walk among them. But you understand, Easton. You can take over teaching the Tarn. But I can't keep my body going much longer, I'm afraid. I'm starting to fray at the edges. Some things break down after a while. She smiled ruefully again and took a step forward. She moved like the hares, and finally I understood. Maddie's control of her body stopped at the neck. Below the break, the Tarn was controlling her body like a puppet. I stood frozen for far too long, watching her approach. Madeline, said carefully, this thing, whatever it is, what was killing you, devouring you alive. I would not call the fungus Va. Never that. It was a horror and it had eaten my friend. I know, said Madeline. She dismissed this with a roll of her eyes. Of course Va did. Va didn't mean to. Va slowed the process as much as Va could, but Va couldn't help but feed a little. Of course I died eventually. Then and I looked at each other over her head. I hope my face was expressionless. His was not. You know that you are dead, I said. Madeline's smile was beatific. Easton, she said as kindly as if I were a child, I've been dead for at least a month. The Tarn stretched out one of her hands and I recoiled. There were puffs of hyphae like cotton wool growing from under her fingernails, shockingly white against the bruised black skin. Her touch had alarmed me days ago. Knowing what I knew now, fresh blood. At least fireworks, if I can get the lamp oil on her. No, this can't be nearly enough. Like so much to burn the hair. God, why are bodies so wet? Den was half leading, half carrying Roderick back around the bed. I eased myself a little to one side, trying to place myself between Madeline and the other two. How's that possible? You were breathing. You had a heartbeat. The Tarn kept my heart beating as long as Va could. My body knew what to do, Va just had to give it the orders. But after Roderick broke my neck, the orders didn't travel anymore. She pushed her head upright again. It doesn't matter. What was I when I was alive? I was of no use to anyone, least of all myself. I was a pretty doll for my mother to dress up and for men to look at, and then she died and eventually I came here where there were no men to look at me. And at last I found a purpose. She smiled up at me. There were white threads at the corners of her mouth, and when she spoke I could see flashes of her tongue coated in pale wool. I took another step back. Evil, Roderick had said. But it wasn't evil that I was seeing, it was alien. A monstrous alienness so far removed from what I understood that every fiber of my being screamed to reject it, to run, to get it away. Dear Alex, she said in a line forming between her eyebrows. You understand, don't you? You have to understand. You have to help me save Ben. Maddie, you have to. I could never help anything that killed you. Which sounded better than the real truth, which was that I wanted to shoot the thing she had become and then burn the body and sow the fields with salt. You're helping, Roderick. Pain blossomed in my gut. He wasn't wrong. The Tarn hasn't hurt anyone, he said. Not deliberately. Va doesn't feel pain, so how could Va understand? Now Va knows better. Another step forward. It won't hurt now. And if it hadn't been so weak, the little bit Va had to take defeat wouldn't have mattered. Denton had Roderick almost to the door now. Maddie, are you asking me to let that thing infect me? Not infect. He looked offended at the word. Just give Van a home. Va's like a child. Va needs someone to care for Van. And I know you'll protect Van and stand up for Van, like you always did for me. She walked forward and I backpedaled. I had a gun and fire, and I was probably close to 100 pounds heavier, and I still retreated. Alex didn't reach out and grab the back of my jacket. He hauled and I scrambled backwards, and the last I saw of Madeline was the door slamming in her face. There were no locks on the outside. I leaned my weight against the door. Get something to block it, I said to Denton. Roger was propped up against a wall like a drunk holding up the bar. The doctor bolted down the hallway. Alex, Maddie knocked on the door. That's the sound, mumbled Roderick. It's the sound. She's still moving. I can hear it from the crypt. Can't you hear it? I hear it, I assured him. Alex, let me out. You have to help me. The door shook under a blow and actually shoved me forward an inch. I set my feet and braced my back against it. The Tarn was far stronger than Madeline had ever been. Alex, I'm begging you. It's not her, said Roderick. He was listening sideways, but I didn't dare reach out to catch him. Easton, sir, it's not really her. I know, I told him. I know it isn't. Alex, you have to help me save the Tarn. Sir, I hear her. So do I, Usher. Blows rained against the door. How was it so strong? To answer your question, Moon, Easton is the last name. Alex is the first name. I imagine Madeline's frail wrists beating against the wood. Surely the skin was split under such punishment. But perhaps Tarn didn't care. Why would a fungus care about broken flesh? It didn't feel pain, and now neither did she. Alex! Tinnitus roared in my ears, drowning out everything. I welcomed it. It didn't last nearly long enough. I'm sorry, Maddie, I said. I don't know if she heard me. It sounds like her, Roderick said. It's not the other thing. I know. Loud scraping noises heralded the arrival of Denton with a long bench. Here, he said. This ought to be big enough to brace against the opposite wall. It was. Barely. The door opened a crack as he shoved it into the place, and I saw Madeline's blue-black fingers slide around the edges. Bits of hyphae caught in the rough edges of the wood. The bottom of her hand had been hammered raw, dangling gelid bits of flesh and long white threads. Her hand caught the door and shoved. The bench struck the wall, and I heard the groan of wood. But it held. Easton, said the voice from behind the door, no longer Maddie's. Get the servants out, I told him. All one of them, probably. I shoved my arm under Roderick's and dragged him to his feet. My back screamed at me, and I was no longer young, and I would pay the price later. Later, I told it. Later I can fall apart from the knees up. Roderick sagged against me. I knew I would have to kill her, he whispered. I knew it. I never expected you to come here. It's all right, I told him. It's all right. We got down the stairs somehow. Roderick started to take more of his own weight. My back was grateful, even if he was more slow. I meant to have Denton visit then leave, he said. When he saw how sick she looked, no one would be surprised that she had died after. He lifted a shaking hand to his face. I'm so sorry, East. I'm sorry. I had to end that thing. I nodded. It was unthinkable, but after what I had seen, I no longer questioned his motives. It's all right, Roderick. I understand. I thumped him on the back as if he were a dog I was seeking to reassure. Oddly, this seemed to soothe him. We'll be all right. Which was a lie, but one we both needed. Denton had the servants in the courtyard by the time we reached it. There were only two of them, the ubiquitous manservant and the woman I suppose was the cook. I sent the stable boy to the inn with my horse, he said, and I nodded. Roderick stood on his own, swaying. He nodded to the two servants. Aaron, Mary, Silver. Please go to the village. He swallowed. I'll catch up to you when I can. Mary turned away, expressionless. Aaron lingered. Sir, may I assist you? He eyed me with cautious distrust, clearly not sure if I was the architect of Usher's condition or his salvation. Not this time. Roderick smiled weakly in the morning light. His skin was a ghastly shade. Please, go with Mary. So I don't worry. Very well, sir. Aaron drew himself up and bowed, and then followed the cook down the road and away from the house. And then it was only Denton and Roderick and me, standing in the courtyard looking up at the cursed house, at the windows gazing down like alien eyes. The tarn flickered with light and woke reflections in the glass. How long until she gets out, do you think? Asked Denton. I swallowed, remembering those hammer-like blows against the door. Not long. If it doesn't just break her body apart trying. And even that might not stop it. Why should it? Scanned the archway and that led to the garden, looking for hares. It is simple, said Roderick. The ushers have allowed this monstrous thing to grow. The last usher will see that it does not get out. He nodded quietly to himself. You can't go alone, he said at once. Yes, I can. He gripped my shoulder. I still hear her, he added. I hear her now. She's in there. She isn't dead. She isn't dead enough. And I can hear the thing in the tarn talking back. But what if it... He smiled angelically at me. Go, Easton. You're the last of my friends and the best. Do only this for me. I swallowed, and then I thumped his back one last time and stepped away, and Denton and I staggered back from the accursed house, while Roderick Usher went back inside. We were halfway down the road, still inside of the manor house, when the first flame reached the roof. Chapter 13. Final chapter. The house burned for 2 days. Denton and I, dead on our feet, took shifts turning back anyone who tried to extinguish it. I must have slept at some point, but I honestly have no memory of it. I listened to the roar of the fire and thought of Roderick saying I know exactly where I would place the match. If the tarn glowed, it was swallowed up by the orange reflections. At last, when there was clearly no saving the house or anything in it, we went to the village inn. I slept for 18 hours straight, waking only to drink cold tea and piss it out again. Surely if the water had been boiled for tea, it would be safe. Surely. When I finally got up, I checked the mirror for any sign of white wool on my tongue. Couldn't see any. I stumbled down to the common room and found Denton huddled over near the fire. You look like I feel, I told him. What a coincidence, I said. I feel about how you look. I collapsed into the other chair by the fire. The innkeeper brought me a mug of something. It was hot, and that was all I cared about. We sat there, and I drank whatever was in the mug and slowly felt human again. It was not an unmixed blessing. It meant that I could think again, and my thoughts were a horror. Judging by the circles under Denton's eyes, his weren't much better. I keep thinking of what it could do, said Denton. Take us over, you mean? Not just that. Denton hitched his chair a little closer. It could move people around, learning to talk. Suppose it got better at it. Good enough that no one gave it a second thought. Suppose it spread. The chill in my bones seemed to radiate outwards. It could go anywhere, I said softly. Reproduce itself. We'd be at its mercy. Just extensions of it like the hairs. Denton nodded. Madeline had said the tarn meant no harm. Probably neither did rabies. We could not risk humanity on the continued goodwill of an infant monster that could puppet the dead. I grabbed the poker and stirred up the log, trying to warm myself. How do we know it's not in us already? I don't know. I think maybe if we don't get a lungful of lake water, we might be all right. It seemed to start in the lungs. And Madeline kept going back to the water, maybe I don't know, maybe so the little bit that was in her could talk to the bit in the lake? So maybe if we can destroy what's in the lake somehow. Trailed off. I wondered if there was enough alcohol in the village to cleanse the lake, or to hell if there was enough alcohol in all of Galatia. The hell do we destroy a lake? I asked. Front door opened. Well, said Angus, stamping his feet on the mat. The wagon load of sulfur we brought seems like a good start. Angus, man, fuck yeah. 1,200 pounds of sulfur. I stared from Angus to Miss Potter and back again. Where did you get... How did you get... Miss Potter had clearly traveled hard and suffered for it. Her hair was a wild gray tangle, and there were immense bags under her eyes. Yet her back was as ramrod straight, and her upper lip was as stiff as ever, and I inordinately glad to see both. Angus looked like Angus. Angus always looked like Angus. Sulfur, said Miss Potter primly, is used in the treatment of scab, rust, and a number of fungal ailments affecting fruit trees. When it became abundantly clear that the authorities were not going to listen to what we had to say, we stopped by several of the orchards farther down the valley. This is, I am told, the very finest Sicilian sulfur, considered superior to the American sort. Madam, said Denton, while normally I might try to defend the honor of my countrymen, at this moment I could kiss both you and the Sicilian sulfur. You'll do no such thing, grumbled Angus, or I'll call you out, doctor. And Miss Potter actually blushed. Where's Hob? I asked as we went outside. Down the valley, standing surety for the return of the wagon and team. Hob was worth 3 times as much as the pair of draft horses standing in the harness, but this was definitely not the time to quibble. The 2 feather-footed brutes could pull, that was certain. The wagon was piled high with sacks, but they did not shirk, not even when the 4 of us climbed on as well. Angus took up the reins. To my surprise, Aaron joined us. Angus nodded to him. His face was lean and he looked as weary as the rest of us. We're poisoning the lake, said Denton bluntly. Oh, I closed my eyes while Denton explained about a fungal disease in the lake that caused madness. It was as good an explanation as any and close to true. Aaron considered this. Not surprised, sir. We've known that lake's bad since my grandfather's day. You and Mary should take care, said Denton carefully. It may spread by drinking the lake water. I could hear the disbelief in the man's voice. Nobody drinks that water, sir. Denton paused. But in the house, there's a well. A good deep one. I turned my face away so that no one would see the tears of relief running down it. Angus and Miss Potter were silent when we reached the ruins. Smoke still rose in thin wisps from the wreckage, and the lake was silent, deceptively placid. We grabbed the bags. The powder struck the surface of the water, and for an instant I feared that it would not sink. But then I watched as the granules began to settle, and then they mixed with the water, forming dark swirls that sank deeper into the tarn. I turned away to grab a second bag when green radiance flared around us. I saw the glow on the side of the wagon, and the stolid horses shied in sudden alarm. Angus moved to take their heads, murmuring soothing nonsense. I dare say that it knows it's under attack, murmured Miss Potter. Huh, said Aaron. The tarn blazed up with sickly light. Pale, gelatinous shapes pulsed in the depths, but it had no power to reach us. I dumped out another bag, then another, my hands caked with the stuff. The tarn could not die fast enough. I even dared to walk over the causeway among the cracked stones still radiating heat and throw handfuls out as far out in the water as I could reach. God, I thought, would be enough? Slowly, the light dimmed. I came back for another bag, but Angus stopped me. We've used it all, he said. We need more. Oh, look, Miss Potter pointed. The light was almost gone as we watched it pulse a few more times, and then nothing. We waited for over an hour as the sun sank and there was no change. No glow rose from the water. The jelly-like shapes vanished under the darkness, and everywhere was a heavy smell of burned things. Is it done? I whispered. She nodded to me, that fine, stern woman with the heart of a lion. I believe, Lieutenant, that it's done. I'll keep an eye on it, offered Aaron. If there's any more lights, we'll know what's needful. All right, I said. My voice was hoarse and rasping in my ears. And if you see any hares, any animals coming to the water to drink, shoot them and burn their bodies. Important. Aye, sir, we will. He reached over and grabbed my forearm. I wondered how dreadful I must look that he was trying to comfort me, when his home was a smoking ruin behind us. And then we drove away and left behind the dead lake and the smoldering timbers of the fallen House of Usher. And that is what moves the dead. What a fucking ride, let me tell you. let me tell that was excellent from start to finish. I was locked in, enthralled from the beginning of that book till the end. That might be one of my new favorites. I'm glad I bought the physical version of this book. I thought about buying the Kindle version, but I went with the physical copy, and I'm glad I did because that is definitely bookshelf worthy. As a small surprise, I do have the second book in the series. So this is a series by T. Kingfisher. The next book in the series still follows our protagonist, Alex Easton, into their next adventure, their next horror, their next ordeal, as they venture back home and see what adventures ensue there. Now that is planned to read on stream, absolutely. I will be getting that going likely tomorrow night. I think this weekend I'm going to do some adventure things. We're gonna switch up the vibe a little bit more lighthearted, so I don't have nightmares for the next couple of days. But we're gonna switch back to, we're gonna restart the series, Orconomics, for the VODs, so I can upload them on my YouTube. I have read them before, and the VODs are available on Twitch, but my setup was bad then, and the sound only comes out on the right side because of the way I was using my mic. But with my new setup, I think we will do a much better work on that. Now, Orconomics is a favorite of mine. I am about halfway through the book myself. I'll be reading from the beginning, and you're gonna hear me react to some things as I go reading through that just kind of click out to me, given the knowledge that I have of the future. Um, we're gonna start from chapter one. We're gonna start that from the very beginning and proceed with that, however long it ends up taking us. These chapters are in Orconomics are a good bit longer, so we'll look into that there. But for the next week or so, we're going to be swapping between the two. We're going to be swapping from Orconomics to the next book in the series, which is, oh my god, what's this book called? I literally haven't seen it on the couch over there. I just don't want to go get it. I'll make a whole thing about it. I'll make a whole like title screen for it. But what feasts at night? That's what it is. But for tonight, thank you for showing up. This was excellent. What a finale. What an ending to that book. I'm happy. I'm sated. I'm satisfied. Thank you for your time. I love you. Good night.